4:30 in the morning, Bayou Lafourche, Louisiana. The water is black glass. There is a man sitting in a pirogue so old the paint has given up trying to stay on it. His hands look like they were carved out of leather and engine grease. He has no fish finder, no trolling motor, no tackle box worth more than what you would spend on a gas station sandwich. And in the first 2 hours of daylight, he pulls 11 redfish out of that bayou, while two guys in a $60,000 bass boat 30 yards away cannot buy a single bite. His secret? 11 cents of copper wire twisted around a steel hook. That man's name was Earl Thibido, and the trick he perfected over 40 years in the Louisiana bayou is the single most dangerous piece of knowledge the fishing electronics industry prays you never find out. Welcome back to Forbidden Lures, the only place on the internet where we rip the lid off the overpriced, overhyped modern tackle industry and hand you the raw, unfiltered secrets that actually put fish in the cooler. Not theories, not gimmicks. Proven, field-tested knowledge that somebody, somewhere, does not want you to have. And today? Today we are going deep. We are talking about one piece of copper wire, one forgotten law of physics, and one retired offshore welder who figured out how to weaponize it. By the end of this video, you will know exactly why this works, exactly how the industry has been selling it back to you for hundreds of dollars, and exactly how to rig your own hooks tonight so you can trigger violent, aggressive strikes by tomorrow morning. But first, let me tell you how Earl Thibido stumbled onto the most forbidden fishing secret in America. Earl Thibido, the man who broke the code. Earl Thibido spent 38 years welding pipe on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. If you have never been on an offshore rig, let me paint you the picture. It is a city of steel floating in salt water. Every single day, that salt water is trying to eat that steel alive through a process called galvanic corrosion. Two different metals touch each other inside salt water, and nature creates a tiny battery that slowly destroys them both. On a rig, if you ignore that science, pipes fail, structures weaken, people can die. So Earl did not just understand galvanic corrosion. He lived it, breathed it, and fought it with his bare hands for nearly 4 decades. Then he retired. And like a lot of Louisiana men, he took to the bayou. Here is the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, Earl is sitting in his pirogue, dead quiet, watching the water. He had just rewrapped some copper grounding wire around a pipe fitting on his dock that morning, and he noticed something strange. There were small fish circling that fitting underwater, hovering around it, drawn to it, almost hypnotized. And something clicked in Earl's brain. He thought, if two metals touching in salt water create a tiny electrical charge strong enough to destroy $1 million oil rig, what would that same charge do if you put it right next to a fish's mouth? He went home, grabbed a steel hook and a scrap of copper wire from his toolbox, twisted them together, baited up with a chunk of cut mullet, and paddled back out. What happened next, Earl later said, was like somebody flipped a switch in the bayou. Fish that had been ignoring everything he threw at them suddenly attacked his bait like it had personally offended their entire family. He tripled his catch that day, and the day after that, and the day after that. For 3 straight years, all Earl used was that same 11-cent piece of copper wire, his 40 years of knowledge about how metals behave in water, and a cooler that was never big enough. What Earl figured out, sitting in that pirogue, and what university researchers later confirmed in their laboratories, is something that could put a serious dent in the multi-billion-dollar fishing electronics industry. And the fact that almost nobody talks about it should tell you everything you need to know. So let me break it down, piece by piece, starting with the lie they have been feeding you for 50 years. 1. The multi-billion-dollar lie. I want you to think about your last trip to the tackle shop, or the last time you scrolled through one of those online fishing gear stores. You saw the fish finders. You saw the price tags. The cheapest one with any kind of fish attract technology starts at $150. The premium models? $800, $1,000, more. And every 2 years, a shiny new version drops, and suddenly the one you mortgaged your lunch money for is obsolete. New screen, new sonar frequency, new software update you have to pay for. It is a hamster wheel made of carbon fiber and broken promises. But here is what they will never print on the box. Fish do not care about your screen resolution. Fish do not care about your sonar frequency. Fish care about 2 things: biology and electricity. Now pay close attention, because this is the part that changes the game. You know that boat you were sitting in? Right now, it is acting like a giant fish-repelling battery. Here is why. When you drop an aluminum hull, a stainless steel prop, and a set of lead downrigger weights into the same water, you just created a crude battery. Different metals, same electrolyte. A weak electrical current starts flowing through a process called electrolysis, and the charge your boat is pumping out? Negative. And here is the part that should make you furious. A negative electrical charge physically repels fish. It pushes them away from your gear. You are spending thousands of dollars on electronics and lures, and your own boat is telling every fish within range to get lost. Now, the industry knows this. They have known it for decades. That is why commercial fishermen and elite charter captains quietly use devices called black boxes, electronic voltage regulators that mask your boat's negative signature and replace it with a controlled positive charge, typically between 0.5 volt and 0.8 of a volt, just enough to flip the switch from "danger, stay away" to "something interesting is over here." These things work. They work extremely well, and they cost hundreds of dollars. But Earl Thibido did not need a black box. Earl knew something better. He knew that a single foot of copper wire from the hardware store, 11 cents, creates a perfect, self-sustaining, positive galvanic signal. No battery, no wires, no software update, no planned obsolescence. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for as long as that wire touches that hook. 11 cents versus $800. And the 11-cent solution never needs charging. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds too good to be true. How can a piece of scrap wire do the job of an expensive electronic device? The answer is not magic. It is physics, and it is absolutely lethal. Let me show you exactly how it works. 2. The science of the strike. Your hook is a battery. To understand why copper wire turns a dead hook into a fish magnet, you have to understand how fish actually experience the world, because it is nothing like how you and I experience it. Imagine you are a redfish. You live in water so murky you cannot see your own tail. You hunt in total darkness half the time. Your eyes? Almost useless. So how do you find food? You feel electricity. This is real. This is not science fiction. It is called electroreception, and it is one of the most powerful sensory systems in the animal kingdom. Almost every predatory fish on the planet has some version of it. You know that visible line running down the side of a fish's body? That is the lateral line. It is packed with tiny sensory cells called neuromasts, microscopic hair-like nerve endings that detect vibrations and pressure changes in the water. But in predators like redfish, trout, and catfish, that system is backed up by something even more powerful: specialized electrical receptors concentrated in their head and snout. These receptors are so sensitive, they can detect electrical fields measured in billionths of a volt. And here is the key, the discovery that makes the entire copper wire trick work. In 1982, a researcher named Belayev at the Moscow All-Union Research Institute proved something that the fishing industry has been quietly terrified of ever since. Every fish, regardless of species, can tell the difference between a positive electrical charge and a negative one. And almost universally, they are attracted to the positive charge. Why? Because every living thing produces tiny electrical signals. When a bait fish struggles, when it bleeds, when its muscles fire and its nerves twitch, it gives off a faint positive voltage. Millions of years of evolution have hardwired predatory fish to seek out that signal. Positive charge means food. It means something alive, something vulnerable, something worth killing. Now, take a steel hook, wrap copper wire around it, drop it in the water. You just built a battery. This is not a metaphor. This is applied physics. Copper sits higher than steel on what scientists call the electrochemical series, a ranking of how badly different metals want to give up their electrons. When these two metals touch inside an electrolyte, which is the water you are fishing in, electrons are physically forced to flow from the steel into the copper. That flow creates a continuous, steady microcurrent, a tiny, positive electrical signal radiating out from your hook 24 hours a day for free. Researchers at Louisiana State University measured this exact reaction in their marine science lab. Copper and steel in fresh water, roughly 0.3 of a volt. Small, but real. But here is where it gets insane. Move to saltwater or brackish water, like, say, a Louisiana bayou, and the dissolved sodium and chloride ions in that water act like an amplifier. Conductivity jumps up to 40% higher. That same 11-cent piece of copper wire on the same hook now broadcasts its signal 40% further than it would in a farm pond. So when your lure drops into that water, the fish is getting hit with 3 signals at once. Its eyes see the flash, its lateral line feels the vibration, and its electroreceptors detect a live, positive electrical signature coming from your hook. 3 signals, 3 independent confirmations. The fish's brain does not debate. It does not hesitate. It fires one single command. Kill it. Now. And that is why Earl Thibido's cooler was always full. But Earl did not stop at the basics. Over 40 years on the water, he developed 3 advanced techniques that took this simple piece of copper wire and turned it into something the weekend warriors could never touch. These are the techniques the tackle industry does not want you to see. Let us start with the first one. 3. Earl's Arsenal. Technique 1. The braid. Now, most guys who hear about the copper wire trick for the first time do the obvious thing. They grab a single strand of wire, wrap it around the hook, and call it done. And honestly, even that basic rig will outfish 90% of what is in your tackle box right now. But Earl was not most guys. Earl was an engineer, and engineers optimize. He noticed that a single thick strand of wire only contacts the hook at a few tiny points. And since the galvanic reaction, the battery effect, happens at the surface where the two metals touch, a few contact points means a weak signal. So Earl asked himself a simple question. How do I get more surface area without making the whole rig bulky and unnatural? The answer was a braid. Instead of one thick strand, Earl took 3 thinner strands of 20-gauge copper wire and twisted them tightly together into a spiral. Then he wrapped that braid around the hook shank. 3 strands, 3 times the surface area. 3 times the metal-to-metal contact with the steel. And the result? A dramatically stronger galvanic reaction, a louder bioelectric signal punching further into the water. Earl did not guess about this. He tested it, rigorously. For an entire year, he fished the exact same stretch of bayou, alternating between single-wire hooks and his braided hooks. Same bait, same conditions, same water. The braided hooks outperformed the single-wire hooks by 40%. 40% more fish in the boat, using the same copper that cost the same 11 cents. That alone would be enough for most people. But Earl had 2 more tricks up his sleeve. And the next one? The next one is absolutely devastating. 4. Earl's Arsenal, Technique 2, the double metal. If the braid is a rifle, the double metal is a grenade. Here is the concept. Instead of relying on just 2 metals, copper and steel, Earl introduced a third player, zinc. The rig is simple. You wrap your copper wire around the hook shank, 5 tight turns just like before. Then, you take a tiny piece of zinc, about the size of a pencil eraser. You can snip this off any cheap zinc sacrificial anode from a marine supply store, or even a standard zinc washer from the hardware store. Costs pennies. You pinch that little piece of zinc onto the hook shank right above your copper wraps. Now stand back, because you just built something electrochemists call a triple junction. 3 different metals, all touching each other, all submerged in the same electrolyte. And each pair of metals generates its own unique voltage at a completely different level. Copper and steel, roughly 3/10 of a volt. Zinc and steel, about 6/10 of a volt. And zinc and copper interacting together, up to 9/10 of a volt. 3 voltages, 3 frequencies, all pulsing simultaneously from one single hook. Now, a single frequency signal from copper alone will pull a fish in from 40 feet away. Impressive. But the multi-frequency chaos coming off a triple junction, that does something entirely different to a fish's nervous system. It does not just attract them, it confuses them. It excites them. It overloads their lateral line with a signal so complex, so chaotic, that it perfectly mimics the one thing they cannot resist: a dying baitfish. Think about it. When a baitfish is in its death throes, its nerves are not firing in a clean, steady pattern. They are firing erratically, chaotically, in bursts and spasms. And that is exactly what your triple junction is broadcasting. Earl said that fish did not just approach the double metal rig, they attacked it. Pure, violent, predator mode aggression, because every receptor in their body was screaming that something was dying right in front of them, and they needed to be the first one to get it. 3 metals, a few pennies, and a signal that drives predators absolutely insane. But Earl had one more trick, and this last one? This is the one he called the cheapest, most effective upgrade in the history of fishing on planet Earth. 5. Earl's Arsenal, Technique 3, the Salt Boost. This one is so simple it almost feels like cheating, but the science behind it is ruthless. Before you cast your copper-wrapped hook, you grab a heavy pinch of coarse sea salt and press it deep into your bait, whether that is cut bait, a shrimp, or even a soft plastic. Really work it in there. Then you cast. The moment that bait hits the water, the salt starts dissolving, and it does 2 devastating things at the exact same time. First, those dissolving salt crystals release a cloud of sodium and chloride ions directly around your hook. This artificially spikes the water conductivity in that immediate zone by up to 60%. Your copper wire's galvanic signal, which was already potent, suddenly gets supercharged. It hits harder. It travels further. It screams louder into the darkness. Second, as that salt washes away, It creates an intense chemical gradient, a scent trail that fish can literally taste and smell. You are not just sending an electrical signal anymore. You are pairing it with a chemical beacon, a double-layered trap that attacks two completely different sensory systems at the same time. Now, the salt dissolves completely in about 10 minutes. That boost is temporary. But think about every trip you have ever taken. When do most of your strikes happen? The first few minutes after your bait settles. That critical window when the water around your lure is freshest, most active, most alive. The salt boost turns that window into a kill zone. Earl carried a small bag of crushed, coarse sea salt in his tackle box every single trip for decades. He called it the cheapest, most effective upgrade in the history of fishing. A handful of salt and a few cents of copper wire. That was his entire electronics budget. Now, before you run to the garage and start stripping wires out of the wall, there are rules. This is science, not magic. And science has parameters you need to respect. 6. The Masterclass Rules of Galvanic Angling. Let me be completely straight with you here, because this is where Forbidden Lures separates from every other channel that just hypes you up and sends you home disappointed. This trick is powerful. It is proven, but it does not work on everything, everywhere, all the time. And if I do not tell you that, I am no better than the companies selling you $800 fish finders. So let us start with who this trick does not work on. If you are a die-hard largemouth bass fisherman, and I know a lot of you are, you can leave the copper at home for this one. Largemouth are visual ambush predators. They react to movement and sight. The electrical signal from copper simply does not trigger their strike response the way it does in species that rely on electroreception. I wish it did, but I am not going to lie to you. Now, here is where it gets deadly. Saltwater and brackish water. This is copper wire's killing field. Redfish are the #1 target. Their lateral lines are biologically engineered to detect hidden prey in murky, zero-visibility bayou water. Earl caught more redfish with his copper braids than with any commercial lure ever made. Speckled trout are a close second, especially at dawn and dusk when their vision dims and their electrical sensitivity peaks. Copper wire paired with a piece of cut mullet at sunrise? That is not a fishing trip. That is an execution. In freshwater, catfish are the undisputed kings of electrical detection. Those barbels, the whiskers on their face, contain more electroreceptor cells per square inch than any other freshwater species in North America. They will pick up a copper signal from over 60 feet away in brackish conditions. Striped bass in river systems also hit copper-wrapped hooks with savage force, because the moving current actually carries and amplifies the galvanic signal downstream like a highway straight to their face. Next rule: temperature matters. Earl called it the electric window. Copper wire works best when the water temperature is above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Below 60, ion mobility slows down, conductivity drops, and your signal fades like a dying radio station. The sweet spot, the absolute prime zone, is between 65 and 80 degrees. That is when the water hits maximum natural conductivity, and your copper wire sings like a siren calling ships onto the rocks. Final rule: rigging distance. The electrical field your hook generates is localized. It is not broadcasting across the entire lake. If you are trolling, keep your leader short, 10 to 20 feet. That keeps your lure inside the strongest zone of attraction generated by the electrolysis from your boat's hull. Run a 50-foot leader, and your lure is swimming outside the hot zone. You lose the benefit. Keep it tight. Keep it close. Keep it lethal. Those are the rules. Respect them, and this trick will change the way you fish forever. Ignore them, and you will blame the copper instead of your setup. Do not be that guy. Reclaiming the water. Let us step back and look at what we just uncovered. 3 techniques: the braid, the double metal, the salt boost. Combined total cost? Less than $1. No battery, no charging cable, no app, no monthly subscription, no firmware update, no planned obsolescence designed to drain your wallet every 24 months. A retired welder in a rotting pirogue on a Louisiana bayou figured all of this out by applying the same laws of physics he used to keep men alive on oil rigs. Meanwhile, the corporate electronics industry has spent 50 years praying, literally praying, that you never realize the alternative to their $1,000 machines has been sitting in the plumbing aisle of your local hardware store this entire time. The best fishing knowledge in the world does not live in a corporate high-rise. It never did. It lives in the calloused hands of the people who actually work the water. People like Earl Thibido. Now, if you want the full, unrestricted deep dive into every galvanic technique the old-timers mastered, every species chart, every conductivity table, every seasonal adjustment you need to turn your tackle box into a bioelectric arsenal, it is all inside the Angler's Vault. First link in the description right below this video. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, share this with every angler you know, because every time you do, you keep alive the kind of raw, traditional knowledge that the modern tackle industry wants dead and buried. $1's worth of copper and a pinch of salt, that is all it takes. Earl Thibido knew that for 40 years out on the bayou. Now, so do you. Get out there, rig up some copper, and I will see you on the water. Stay relentless.